Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here speaking with you this morning. I took the liberty of making a correction on the iMedia slide there. This is not the impending era, it's here. And my topic this morning is designed to share with you what's happening in this space and why it's important, how we ought to be thinking about it, and hopefully ways in which we can capitalize on the opportunities. So I wanted to start out the talk by sharing with you an example that I found quite interesting. How many of you saw the photo of the Coke vending machines with the big "Hug Me" emblazoned on the front of it within the last month or so? This was in Singapore, and as you can see, this photo was taken, shared widely. I think this really serves as a metaphor for the discussion that we're going to have this morning. I think it's a great example of Coca-Cola in this case, but a big brand that we all admire, using SoLoMo in ways to connect with consumers where they are in a compelling way. And as we'll discuss in just a few minutes, often in a very emotional way as well. I will ask one more question, and that is, if you were alone and walked past a Coke machine that had "Hug Me" on it, how many of you would walk up and hug it? Probably not many. Feel kind of weird. But obviously there's someone taking the photo, and as we think about SoLoMo, quite often, many of these activities in which SoLoMo is present, there's an image being captured, some experience that's been created, generated, and it's being shared often through some visual means. So you'll see that plays a very important role. Now this is a follow-up to a related kind of campaign that Coke did a couple of years ago, in which they actually had an individual in a Coke machine handing out not only soft drinks, but pizza as well. And this particular piece got shared on YouTube 4.6 million times. So SoLoMo clearly works. I'd like to share with you just a few examples of many, and you'll be hearing more over the next couple of days. But these, I think, embody, again, some of the principles that I want to be sure to reinforce today. First of all, Guinness. You've probably seen the QR code that made a lot of news over the last week, in which the QR code only appears if you fill the glass with Guinness. It has to be dark. And if you can imagine, again, all the things that one can do with that QR code, including QR codes that are specific to the location, great example of SoLoMo. On the bottom left there, Foo Fighters, if you saw them on Saturday Night Live with Mick Jagger, hopefully one of your favorite brands. Regardless, one riot last year, just before they were acquired by Walmart Labs, ran a campaign in which they identified concentrations using Twitter data where individuals were tweeting about music. They concentrated the ad campaign in those locations and got a click-through rate of some 5x relative to campaigns that did not take advantage of that information. Up in the upper right-hand corner here, which site reached 10 million US visitors faster than any independent site in history? And which site is generating more referral than the three sites that you see here? Any guesses? Pinterest. Now, it's relatively new to my household, but the big news for my family last week is that our daughter got engaged, so suddenly my wife's asking me about Pinterest and ways in which she can use Pinterest to find out how to prepare for the wedding. Fortunately, we've got a year and a half to go. The right-hand corner shows an example from Starwood Hotels, and in fact, this is the lobby of now my second favorite resort in Colorado, the Westin in Beaver Creek. And what Starwood has done is customize their app in ways that essentially they call state-aware, which I think is a great name. It understands where the consumer is in the decision cycle, including when they're on property visiting and so on. So this last example illustrates a way in which a premise-based business is using SoLoMo to tailor the experience and provide a great deal of information as well as other tools that really enhance the visitor's experience in this case. So what's this all about? Well, from an advertiser's perspective, what SoLoMo allows you to do really is four things. First of all, personalized based on more specific knowledge, not only of where that individual is, but what's important to them. It allows you to think of and hopefully engage in a much more creative way, as we'll see. Often, it's about enabling the individual to do things that are specific to their environment, but also rewarding. And this is relevant not only to brands, but also retailers. In fact, a lot of the work we do does involve retailers. So let's think about the differences and why mobile plays such a unique role. If we think about a laptop versus a mobile device, Which one is with you when you fill in the blank? But I saw a study just last week which actually looked at, and I didn't read the study carefully for obvious reasons, but ask about the use of mobile devices while one is in the restroom, toilet area, etc., which I thought was a little weird. Do you use to share the moment? Which one knows where you are? And then finally, which one recognizes what's around you? Well, those are all things that are uniquely mobile. So as we think about SoLoMo, what SoLoMo is doing is empowering consumers. In fact, I would argue that consumers are way ahead of any brands or retailers or any commercial enterprise in their adoption and use of SoLoMo. But if we think about what SoLoMo allows us to do, it allows us not only to connect with consumers, but also to better understand their context, and finally, to amplify, as the panel mentioned. So those are things that I'm going to elaborate on and describe specifically how SoLoMo does this. Now, I read with horror last month, I think it was Mashable, where an article by someone said he was really tired of hearing about SoLoMo. He actually had a good point. Often we take a term and we begin to nod and we all think we understand what it is. And SoLoMo, in a sense, that acronym has become almost meaningless because it's being used in so many different ways. So I actually thought I would try and define this. The way in which I think about SoLoMo is situated experiences that are enabled by mobile that are shared, often with others, but it could be shared with someone else, including some of the companies and brands represented here. So as we think about SoLoMo, if we unpack this, there are 6 dimensions under mobile, 6 dimensions under location, and 6 dimensions under social that I'd like to spend just a few minutes on. But really the power from SoLoMo comes from thinking about the confluence or convergence or combination of these 6 by 6 by 6. So instead of 6 degrees of separation, what SoLoMo is doing is really creating 216 opportunities to connect, again, more effectively consumers where they are in ways that are meaningful to them. So let's take mobile first. We all know, of course, that mobile devices represent the centerpiece, the most obvious connection that we have with consumers, but there are others in addition to the devices themselves. In fact, a device by itself, when you go to the store and buy the new device, you're all excited, and it won't do anything until they put the SIM card in, and you're connected to some network, and then, of course, you're traveling in an area where there is no connectivity, and you're lost. Well, fortunately, mobile broadband, both through the mobile operators' networks, but also increasingly 3G and Wi-Fi, are enabling individuals to connect using their mobile devices in virtually any place. What that gives individuals access to is not only the internet, and indeed it's no longer the mobile internet, it's the internet because we're experiencing it on both tablets as well as phablets and phones, but also this plethora of apps. And they are emerging. It's an avalanche, if you will. But there are 2 that I want to highlight for this audience that I'll come back to in just a moment. And those are the cloud and sensors that are embedded in the devices, because those are so important to us. But I'd like to share with you just some statistics, again, that reinforce the importance of mobile within this mix of SoLoMo. You all know that smartphones as a percentage of devices owned past the threshold mark within the last couple of months. So smartphone owners in the US are now a majority. I think what's even more striking is the fact that 80% of 18 to 34-year-olds who have purchased within the last 3 months purchased a smartphone. So as you think about this, this is really an inexorable march toward ownership of smartphones, smartphones becoming ubiquitous, and indeed at some point we won't even refer to them as smartphones, they will simply be mobile devices. Indeed, I was working with a mobile operator probably 6, 8 years ago, and they asked me to stop using the term cell phone because they wanted consumers to begin referring to them as mobile devices. It was still a stretch, but I think now many of us are beginning to refer to these as mobile devices. The second statistic there is an important one. 1.2 billion apps downloaded in 1 week following the Christmas holiday there. The last week of the year, 1.2 billion apps worldwide. Now, the US accounted for about half of those. That's a phenomenal number. A lot of excitement. You get a new mobile device. What's the first thing you do? You download an app, you begin to use it. Unfortunately, many of those apps are no longer used in 45, 90 days. In fact, it's a small percentage. Nonetheless, it reflects the tremendous interest individuals have in not only their devices, but things they can do with them as well. The last statistic here, I think, is really one that captures the essence of this. 90% of us, me included, always or most of the time have our mobile device within reach. When we wake up in the morning, when we go to bed at night, throughout the day, and obviously when we're out and about. And that's the essence and importance of mobile. I think the panel also alluded to another point that's important to bring out, and that is increasingly these devices are being used not only when we're out and about, but also when we're sitting in our den, living room, watching television, and used in parallel with other media experiences as well. So that's the Mo part. In fact, had I coined this term, I didn't, but I think I would have probably coined Molo-So, but it doesn't have the same ring as SoLoMo, so we'll stay with SoLoMo. But let's talk about location. The panel touched on this, but a lot of the work that I've done over the last 3.5 years has focused on location. In fact, the first big report that I wrote about 3.5 years ago dealt with location, and I titled that report, Location, the Epicenter of Mobile Innovation. And I still believe that today, and especially as we combine that with social. And in its essence, location, of course, refers to position. We know where you are based on lat long. But equally important is knowing something about where you are, the place. And it's important to know not only that you're 32,000 feet, but perhaps that you're in a Virgin America airplane as well. And actually, I have an app for that, and it's from another airline. But that place is very different from knowing the lat long and altitude in this case, as we'll see. Vicinity, what's around you. And a lot of the companies you're going to be hearing from over the next couple of days will talk about geofencing, but important within that is a lot of information about what's around the consumer. Context, and I'm showing the weather here, which is an important driver of what we as consumers do, but also a lot of information drawn from social media sources as well. And then finally, on the bottom, proximity, related to vicinity, but this one's more dynamic. What are we near? What are we approaching? What are we moving away from? Who's in the vicinity? Something that's more dynamic in nature. And then finally, down in the bottom left-hand corner, things around us as well. And I'll highlight some of the developments related to sensors that I think have important opportunities and implications for us. So again, a couple of examples here. 74% of smartphone owners use their phone to get real-time location data. 74%, so 3/4. So this is no longer something that a handful of people are doing. Instead, the majority of us are using our mobile devices to get location-based information. 60% of us search on our on our smartphones daily. So we go on Google or apps to find information, typically that has some relevance to where we are. Now, this bottom statistic ought to get everyone's attention. There was a study done, I believe this was by Razorfish, in which they compared the propensity to click on a map when one is on a mobile device versus a stationary device. And lo and behold, the click-through rate on mobile devices for icons shown on a map is 20x. Now, that was one study. I don't know that that holds in general, but if you think about it, it makes sense. So the beauty of location in particular, we not only know where you are, we know a lot of things that help us better understand what's around you, but in addition to that, the relevance and importance drive behavior. Social. I probably don't need to speak to this crowd too much about this phenomenon, but I'll highlight just a few things. And the 6 dimensions here include 6 close friends, but also the networks now that connect us to much broader audiences, and again, through 6 degrees to even millions of people. The platforms like Twitter and others that are developing that are generating more and more user-generated content, and that being shared, but also increasingly sentiment, how we feel about things, and those expressions are of critical importance. So again, just to reinforce some of the points that have been made already, and you'll hear about over the next couple of days, 1 in 7 minutes spent online are now spent on Facebook. Facebook has agreed to pay $1 billion for Instagram. Why? Because capturing and sharing photos is such an important part of what we do as consumers. And then finally, there's some interesting work done by a fellow at WetPaint, Ben Ilowitz, who has shown that the lifetime value, which is an important metric, how often do they come, but also how long do they stay over time, is 2.5x of a referral from search engines. Okay? So that shows the power of social. I'll click through these slides very quickly, but again, this is a tsunami with lots of sites, traffic being driven by mobile devices, Pandora, Twitter, Facebook. Indeed, that's one of the issues that I guess was most hotly debated over the last couple of weeks. Given the growing number of people who are accessing Facebook by mobile devices, are they indeed going to be able to monetize that in much the same way they've done before? I want to highlight for you two other aspects here. One is the cloud. Without the cloud and all of the things that are being done in the cloud, quite frankly, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it's a combination of big data, algorithms that combine location, social, and are used then in ways that facilitate many of the things we've taken for granted in search. In the future, you'll see in augmented reality, but also all of the things that are down in the right-hand corner, messages, ads, offers, everything else that you'll be hearing more about on the panel tomorrow. Mobile sensors, I'll just highlight here again, basically mobile devices are used less and less for talking. Instead, they're used for not only social, but also for connecting with things as well. So QR codes, as we've mentioned, but barcodes, and increasingly going forward, NFC codes as well. So just to highlight and hopefully bring all this together, as we think about SoLoMo, it's clearly more than lat long. It's understanding, in this case, where the individual is, what's going on around them, how do we use that information, again, in ways that allow us to personalize, enable, engage, and reward. So I'll close in just a couple of minutes here and then entertain questions. But if we think about mobile, location, and social and these 6 dimensions, you've got a palette of some 216 combinations that I encourage you to think about. And I think the panel and moderators especially brought out the importance of not thinking narrowly about advertising with conventional tools on Facebook, but instead using these tools in ways that are creative and allow us to engage with the consumer. The last couple of points that I'd make here involve digital signals. I've got a paper on this if it's of interest to you. But the beauty is that SoLoMo is creating lots of digital signals, a lot of noise as well. But if you extract those signals in ways that help us better understand not only who to target, but what's important to them, it's a very, very powerful concept. And it's important because what it does is reveal at virtually no cost a lot of insight, a lot of information to us related to how consumers are thinking, feeling, what they're doing, and so on. I've got 3 quick examples. Again, Urban Airship is promoting the concept of good push. I think they're on the agenda. If not, be sure to talk with them. But they cited the example of my alma mater, where I taught for a number of years, Michigan Stadium. How would we contextualize and push relevant content to individuals who are sitting in a stadium watching, hopefully, Michigan win, and push mobile messages in ways that are meaningful to them. Walmart Labs, again, as I mentioned earlier, has done a superb job of contextualizing and leveraging this information, which led to the acquisition of OneRide. Place IQ, which I think is here as well, is taking every almost city block in the country and appending information that allows you to understand what's going on in and around that city block. So very, very innovative. Just to wrap up, we're on the verge of extraordinary developments, and I'll highlight 4 here. First of all, we will know increasingly not only what's going on within a 3 or 10 or 100 meter radius, but increasingly what's going on in the aisle in the store. And a couple of companies, Factual, Place IQ, again, are driving nearby, point inside, and others are driving increasingly toward what I'll call micro-location. Mashup, CityMap, again, one that is bringing together from all of these sources information in ways that are useful not only for advertisers, but for consumers as well. I guess the 2 that I'll mention just in closing here are KLM Meet and Seat, which does allow you to pick on the basis of your social graph individuals that you sit next to or wish to avoid, I suppose, is the alternative. And then finally, SoLoMo Yield Management. someday soon, already in LA, I believe it is, you'll be able to bid on and find parking spaces based on your willingness to pay. Because if you think about it, that's a scarce commodity, and indeed one of the ways to drive people into parking structures is to price that based on the supply and demand. And then finally, think near. I think Ellie's in the audience as well, so be sure to chat with him. Okay? So that's SoLoMo in a nutshell. Just in closing, there are lots of resources that I'd call your attention to that are available on our site. Again, I'm Phil Hendrix, Phil_Hendrix on Twitter. You can also download a copy of my slides there if you wish. Sorry, I've used up almost all the time, but if we got time for a question or two, happy to entertain those. Kathleen?
Hello. Hi. Thanks, Phil. Unfortunately, we are running behind. So if you guys have questions for Phil, please grab him, and you can talk about the mobile Tsunami. I'm pretty excited about that. And so real quick housekeeping, thank you so much. That was a ton of great information.
Great. Thanks
Thank
very much. Thank you.
Phil.